He walked into that restaurant like he owned the city. Because he did. Vincent DeLuca hadn't felt anything in 6 years. Not guilt, not grief, not the particular kind of silence that follows a door closing on someone who deserved better. Then he saw her, standing by the window in a white apron, holding a tray of water glasses, alive and ordinary and so completely out of reach that his chest seized like something fundamental had cracked loose inside him. And then, before he could breathe, before he could think, a little blonde girl came running across the dining room floor and wrapped both arms around Evelyn Harper's waist and screamed the word that would dismantle everything Vincent DeLuca had spent 6 years building. Mommy! Drop a like. Comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow so you don't miss a single part. Now let's begin. The morning Vincent DeLuca decided to have breakfast at the Hudson Grand was not, by any standard, a remarkable morning. The city did what it always did. Exhaled carbon and noise and the particular gray light of early November that made Manhattan look like a photograph of itself. His driver pulled the black Escalade to the curb at 11:47 a.m. His security detail, 2 men who moved like furniture that had learned to walk, flanked him on the sidewalk. Vincent buttoned his jacket once, checked nothing, and walked through the restaurant's revolving door without breaking stride. He had a meeting. Carlo Russo, his logistics director, had arranged a private lunch in one of the Grand's back rooms. The kind of room where conversations disappeared into mahogany walls and reappeared nowhere. The Hudson Grand was the kind of place that charged $400 for a steak and never asked questions about who was paying. Vincent had been coming here off and on for 12 years. He knew the maitre d' by name. He knew the corner tables that faced both exits. He knew exactly how long it took for the kitchen to turn over a full lunch service, and therefore exactly how long he could speak without the ambient noise thinning out. What he did not know, what no amount of preparation had accounted for, was that Evelyn was working there. He didn't see her immediately. The Grand's dining room was long and lit in that expensive golden way that flattered everything and revealed nothing. Vincent followed the maitre d' toward the back, nodding once at Carlo, who was already seated with a glass of water and a folder he was pretending to read. Vincent pulled out his chair. He sat. He reached for the water glass, and then he looked up because something in his peripheral vision had shifted. A shape near the window, a stillness inside the lunch rush, and his hand stopped moving. She had her back to him. Dark hair pulled into a low bun, white button-down beneath a black apron. She was taking an order from a two-top near the window, writing something on a small notepad, nodding in that precise way she always had when she was being polite to someone she found faintly irritating. 6 years. 6 years, and he knew the angle of her shoulders the same way he knew his own name. Vincent, Carlo's voice. Vincent set the water glass down without drinking from it. Give me a minute. The Beretti contracts. Carlo. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't leave room for argument. Give me a minute. Carlo closed the folder. Evelyn turned to carry the order toward the kitchen pass-through, and that was when she saw him. The sequence lasted maybe 2 seconds. Her eyes found the room, tracked toward the back tables out of professional habit, and then locked onto his face with the precise impact of something dropped from a significant height. The notepad slipped in her hand. She caught it. She did not drop it. That small, reflexive competence, catching the thing before it fell, was so entirely her that Vincent felt the breath move out of him in a way that had nothing to do with air quality. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked into the kitchen. Vincent sat very still. Across from him, Carlo had the professional wisdom to examine his water glass. The dining room continued around them. Silverware against porcelain, low conversation, the distant bark of a kitchen order. And Vincent DeLuca, who had not been surprised by anything in approximately 4 years, sat in the middle of it and felt something in his chest doing something he couldn't immediately name. He'd thought about this. He'd thought about the possibility, in the abstract, the way you think about car accidents and structural fires, things that are statistically possible but remain safely theoretical until they aren't. He'd told himself, on the 2 or 3 occasions when the thought surfaced at an inconvenient hour, that if he ever encountered Evelyn Harper again, he would feel nothing specific. mild recognition, perhaps, the residual awkwardness of a concluded chapter. He was a man who had ordered violence with less emotional expenditure than most people ordered coffee. He did not feel things in uncontrolled ways. That was not who he was. He picked up the water glass and drank. His hand was steady. He noted this with something that was not quite relief. Evelyn came back out of the kitchen 3 minutes later. She did not look at him. She took another table's order, refilled a water glass on the far side of the room, and moved through her work with the contained, practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to function inside discomfort. Vincent watched her the way he watched most things, without appearing to watch at all, his gaze technically on the middle distance while his attention cataloged everything. The way she moved was slightly different than he remembered, less fluid, more careful. 6 years had put something in her posture that hadn't been there before, a kind of braced quality, like a person who had learned to carry weight and had stopped expecting help. Carlo was talking. Vincent heard approximately 40% of it. Something about the Beretti family's shipping manifests and a discrepancy in the New Jersey numbers. He made the appropriate sounds. He turned a page in the folder Carlo slid toward him. And when Evelyn finally reached a table close enough that their proximity became undeniable, he looked directly at her and said quietly, beneath the ambient noise of the room, "Evelyn." She stopped, her back straightened by a fraction. Then she turned, and her face was composed in a way that must have cost her something. "Mr. DeLuca, not Vincent, not you. Mr. DeLuca, in the register of a professional stranger. Can I get you anything?" The formality of it was extraordinary. He had slept beside this woman for 3 years. He had watched her cry at a movie she'd seen twice before. He had held her hand in the back of a car on the night they'd driven out of the city for no reason except that she'd wanted to see the dark. And she was standing in front of him with a notepad asking him if he wanted anything, her voice giving away precisely nothing. "Sit down," he said. "I'm working." "Evelyn, I'm working, Mr. DeLuca." Her eyes were dark and entirely steady. "If you'd like to order, I can take that. Otherwise, I have other tables." Carlo had gone very quiet. Vincent was acutely aware of his security detail near the entrance, of the other diners, of the dozen ways this conversation could go sideways in a public room. He was aware of all of this, and he said, keeping his voice low and flat, "We need to talk. We talked 6 years ago." A pause so brief it might not have existed. "You were very clear." She turned away. Vincent opened his mouth, and then something happened. From the far side of the restaurant, near the service corridor that connected to the private event spaces, a child came running. She was small, maybe 6 years old. Blonde hair half escaped from 2 braids that had started the day with more ambition than they'd managed to sustain. She was wearing a private school uniform, navy and white, one knee sock slightly lower than the other. And she was running in that wholly committed way that small children run when they have identified their destination and the concept of indoor voice has not yet made a meaningful impression. She crossed the dining room in 8 seconds. She hit Evelyn at full speed, both arms going around her waist, face pressed into the apron. "Mommy, Mrs. Patterson said we could leave early, and Lily's mom brought cupcakes, and I saved you one. It's in my backpack." Evelyn's hand came down on the child's shoulder automatically, protectively, and her body turned a few degrees, not enough to be obvious, but enough, putting herself between the little girl and Vincent's table. "Baby." Her voice had changed completely. The professional composure was gone, and in its place was something warm and exhausted and real. "I'm in the middle of my section. Can you sit at the bar with Marcus for a few minutes? But I have your cupcake." "Charlotte," gentle and firm. "5 minutes, okay? Go find Marcus." The little girl pulled back enough to look up at her mother with the particular expression of a child who is calculating whether this is a negotiable situation. Then something redirected her attention. She looked sideways. Her eyes found Vincent's face. Children have no poker face. Whatever they're thinking moves across their features in real time, unfiltered and complete. Charlotte looked at Vincent the way children look at things that don't quite make sense. Not with fear, not with recognition, but with the pure, unmediated curiosity of someone who hasn't yet learned that staring is rude. She had blue eyes, very blue. The particular shade of blue that had looked back at Vincent from every mirror he'd ever stood in front of. His chest did something that he had no name for. "Charlotte," Evelyn said, her voice carrying a thread of something that wasn't quite urgency but lived in that neighborhood. Bar, Marcus, go. The little girl went, casting one more look back over her shoulder. Vincent watched her climb onto a bar stool and lean across the bar to announce herself to the bartender with the absolute confidence of a child who has never once doubted her welcome anywhere. He looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was already looking somewhere past his left shoulder, her jaw set, the notepad held flat against her thigh. "How old is she?" Vincent said. Not a question. The words came out too even to be a question. "I need to get back to my section." "Evelyn?" He kept his voice below the ambient noise. "How old is she?" "Don't." One word. The kind that's a whole sentence. "I'm not going to make a scene." He wasn't. He was sitting perfectly still with his hands flat on the table and his voice level, and every single thing he was feeling was locked somewhere behind his sternum in a place he'd spent years learning to fortify. "I'm asking you a question. You lost the right to ask me questions." She said it without anger. That was almost worse. The flatness of it. The absence of heat. Like a statement of fact from a textbook no one had bothered to argue with. 6 years ago, in the library of your house, when you told me that a wife who couldn't stay out of your business was a liability you couldn't afford. The words sat between them. Vincent remembered that night. He remembered it with the kind of clarity that certain nights insist on, regardless of how firmly you decline to revisit them. He remembered the exact quality of the light in the library. He remembered what he'd been wearing. He remembered the look on her face when he'd finished speaking, the way she'd stood very still for a moment before she picked up her bag. And he remembered that, and this was the part he never examined too closely, that he had not stopped her, that he had stood there and watched her go and told himself it was the right call. He had been so certain. "She has my eyes," he said. Evelyn said nothing. "Charlotte." He shaped the name carefully. "She has my eyes. I have to get back to work." "Evelyn." She walked away. Clean, decisive, no hesitation. Across the room, Charlotte had produced a slightly crushed cupcake from her backpack and was presenting it to the bartender with the gravity of a formal gift. Vincent watched her. The bartender, Marcus apparently, accepted it with appropriate ceremony and made the child laugh. Her laugh. Even from across the room, even in the middle of the Grand's lunch noise. It cut through everything and landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. Carlo said his name again. Vincent picked up a fork and set it back down. "The meeting is done for today," he said. "Vincent, the Beretti numbers. Send me the file." He pushed back his chair. "I'll review it tonight." We had 2 hours scheduled. Carlo. He looked at his logistics director and Carlo, who had worked for Vincent for 9 years and survived on the strength of his ability to read the room, stopped talking. "The meeting is done." Vincent left $400 on the table for a meal he hadn't eaten, nodded at his security detail, and walked out of the Hudson Grand into the November air. On the sidewalk, he stopped and stood still for a moment, which was unusual enough that his security detail exchanged a brief, careful look. Then he got in the car. "Home," he said. The drive was 22 minutes. He said nothing. He looked out the window at the city and thought about blue eyes and the particular math of 6 years, and beneath the thinking, beneath the calculation, something was happening that he wasn't going to acknowledge yet because acknowledging it would require him to examine what it meant, and he was not ready for that. Not in the back of a car, not at 12:30 on a Tuesday in November, but the math was there. He couldn't not do it. It did itself. Evelyn had left in late October, 6 years ago. Charlotte looked to be approximately 6 years old. The math was not complicated. The math was, in fact, brutally simple, and it sat in the space behind his eyes for the entire 22-minute drive, and was still sitting there when he walked into the DeLuca mansion and his grandmother appeared in the entrance hall and looked at his face with the particular attention she'd been applying to him since he was 7 years old. Margaret DeLuca was 73 and had the posture of a woman who had decided at some point that the world was not going to make her slouch. She was small and white-haired, and she had survived 2 strokes, the death of a husband and a son, and 4 decades of loving people who were in professions that made loving them complicated. She watched Vincent cross the entrance hall and said nothing until he'd passed her, and then she said, "What happened?" Not a question either. The DeLuca household ran on declarative sentences. "Nothing." He kept walking. "Vincent." Her voice, for all her age, still had weight. "You look like you saw a ghost." He stopped walking. His back was to her. He thought about turning around, and he thought about what he would say if he did. "I might have," he said, and went upstairs. Quote, he didn't sleep that night. This was not, in itself, unusual. He was a man who averaged 5 hours and had made a kind of peace with the hours between 2 and dawn that most people spent unconscious. What was unusual was the nature of the wakefulness. Normally, when Vincent didn't sleep, he worked. There was always work. The legitimate empire, DeLuca Holdings, with its real estate portfolios and infrastructure contracts, and the 2 shipping companies that provided excellent cover for the things that DeLuca Holdings preferred not to appear on the balance sheet, generated enough operational complexity to fill any number of sleepless nights. He kept documents on his desk. He kept a phone that received calls at hours when reasonable people were asleep. Tonight he sat on the edge of the bed in his dark room and did not reach for the documents or the phone. He sat there and thought about Charlotte's face, her laugh, the cupcake, the way she'd looked at him from across the room. No fear, no recognition, just that open, uncomplicated curiosity that he could not reconcile with anything in his own experience. He had not been looked at with simple curiosity in years. People looked at him with calculation or deference, or the specific careful blankness that was its own form of fear. Charlotte had looked at him like he was an interesting stranger, because to her he was. Because to her that was all he was. He got up at 4 in the morning, showered, and was at his desk by 4:30. He pulled up the city's private school directory, because the uniform had been specific enough, navy and white, with a crest he'd half registered, and cross-referenced it against the neighborhood where the Grand was located. 3 candidates. He narrowed it from there. By 6 a.m., he had the name, Whitmore Academy for Girls, 11 blocks from the Hudson Grand, with a lower school that ran kindergarten through 4th grade. He sat with the information for a while. Then he closed the laptop and made coffee and stood at the window watching the city get light and told himself he was going to handle this the way he handled everything, methodically, without sentiment. He was going to establish the facts before he did anything at all. The next morning he drove himself. No detail, no Escalade, a nondescript black sedan that he kept for occasions when visibility was a liability. He parked on the opposite side of the street from Whitmore Academy at 7:52 a.m. He had a coffee in the cup holder and the engine running, and he told himself with complete conviction that he was simply verifying information. Charlotte arrived at 8:06. Evelyn was with her, the 2 of them walking at a pace that was slightly rushed in the way of someone who'd started the morning 5 minutes behind schedule. Charlotte had her backpack on and was talking. He could see her mouth moving, animatedly, the full commitment of a child making a story maximally dramatic. And Evelyn was listening and responding without slowing down. At the gate, Charlotte turned and hugged her mother once, hard, and then turned and went through without looking back. That ease. That total absence of separation anxiety. A kid who knew, bone deep, that she was loved and would be returned to. Evelyn watched her go for a moment. Then she turned and walked back the way she'd come, pulling her coat tighter, and he watched her until she turned the corner and was gone. He drove away. He came back the following morning, and the morning after that. He told himself each time that this was information gathering, that he was simply establishing patterns, building a picture, the way you did before any significant decision. He was disciplined about it. He stayed in the car. He didn't approach. He watched Charlotte arrive 3 mornings in a row, and by the 3rd morning he had cataloged the following. She always had her backpack on both shoulders, which suggested either a personal preference or a mother who'd taught her to distribute weight evenly. She stopped to pick up a fallen oak leaf outside the gate on Tuesday, examined it with genuine interest, and put it in her coat pocket. On Wednesday, she arrived with a friendship bracelet on her left wrist that hadn't been there Monday. She greeted the gate attendant by name. She was, from all available evidence, a child who was happy. He hadn't expected that to hit him the way it did. He had spent the last week constructing a frame in which he was wronged, in which Evelyn had taken something from him, hidden something, denied him something. It was an easier frame. It assigned blame in a direction that didn't require him to look too directly at himself. But watching Charlotte through a car window for 3 mornings, watching the particular quality of her happiness, the ease of it, the rootedness of it, made the frame harder to hold. That happiness had been built without him. By Evelyn, alone, with no help from anyone in his world, over the course of 6 years that he had spent not thinking about her. She'd built their daughter a whole, loved life, from nothing, while working as a waitress, while hiding from him. He sat with that on the third morning, long after Charlotte had disappeared through the gate and the street had returned to its ordinary rhythm. The coffee in the cup holder went cold. A city bus moved through his field of vision. 2 women with strollers passed on the sidewalk. He sat and he thought about why Evelyn would be hiding, and the answer assembled itself out of things he already knew. Things about what his world looked like from the outside, about what it meant to have been close to him, about what a reasonable person might conclude about the safety of a child connected to Vincent DeLuca. And when the answer finished assembling itself, it was not comfortable to look at. He had told her she was a liability. He had been talking about the marriage, about the exposure, about the way her instinct to ask questions about his business had started to feel, in the paranoid calculus of that year, like a risk he couldn't manage. He'd said it clinically. He'd meant it clinically. And he had never, not once, stopped to consider what those words would sound like to someone who was, he knew this now, with the cold certainty of math, carrying his child. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Victoria. He let it ring. Victoria Kensington had been a fixture in his life for the last 2 years. Not a girlfriend exactly, and not simply a business associate, but something in the social overlap of those categories that Manhattan maintained for the convenience of powerful people who needed plausible companions at public functions. She was from old money, intelligent, tactful, and entirely clear-eyed about the nature of their arrangement. He respected her. She was useful to him, and in the particular way of relationships built on mutual utility, he had never made her any promises, and she had never asked for any. She called back 20 minutes later. He was in the car, still parked, the engine running now, against the cold. "You missed the Harrington benefit last night," she said. Her voice was crisp and perfectly modulated, the voice of a woman who'd attended the right schools and absorbed their lessons. Something came up. Vincent. A pause. Not long. "I'm hearing things." He looked at the empty school gate. "What things?" "That you were at the Hudson Grand on Tuesday. That you left a meeting halfway through and were seen standing on the sidewalk for an unusual amount of time." Another pause. "That Evelyn Harper is working there." He said nothing. In the silence, he could hear her assembling her response. "I see," she said, and her voice had gone very even. "Victoria, you don't owe me an explanation." She said it cleanly. "I'm simply noting that whatever this is, it will generate attention. You've always been careful about attention." "I'm aware." "Then you're also aware," she said, "that a man in your position suddenly developing an interest in an ex-wife who's been off the radar for 6 years is exactly the kind of story that people find interesting." She paused. "I'm telling you as a friend. Be careful." She hung up. He stared at his phone for a moment and then put it in his jacket pocket and finally put the car in gear. He drove past the Hudson Grand on his way back across town. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He just drove past and saw through the window the long golden dining room beginning to fill for the breakfast service. And he kept his eyes forward and drove. He had his investigator, a former federal agent named Strand, who had worked for the DeLuca family for 11 years and had the ethics of a man who'd decided a long time ago that ethics were situational. Pull everything on Evelyn Harper within 24 hours. Not the DeLuca resources, not the family network. His own personal account, off the main ledgers. He was careful about that. He wasn't ready for this to be visible inside the house. Strand delivered the file on Thursday afternoon. Thin. That in itself was information. Evelyn Harper had existed officially as Eleanor Vale for the last 5 years. The name change was legal, properly documented, buried in county records with no flag on it. She'd been working at the Hudson Grand for 14 months. Before that, 3 other restaurants across 2 boroughs. Before that, a gap of almost a year, early in the timeline, that Strand noted without comment. The birth certificate was the last document in the file. Charlotte Ann Vale, born July 14th, 6 years, 4 months ago. Father. Unknown. Vincent sat at his desk and looked at those 2 words for a long time. Unknown. Not absent. Not deceased. not Evelyn's deliberate erasure of a name she'd chosen to exclude. Unknown. The word a woman uses on a form when she has decided that the man in question is not a presence she is inviting into this record. When she has decided, for whatever reason, that unknown is a cleaner truth than whatever the complicated alternative would require explaining. She hadn't replaced him. She had simply decided at some point during a pregnancy she'd carried entirely alone that he did not exist in this version of her life. He closed the file. He put it in the left drawer of his desk, the one with the lock, and he sat there for a long time with his hands flat on the desk surface and his eyes on the middle distance and something working through him that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite guilt, but lived in the geography where those three things met. His grandmother knocked once and opened the door before he answered. She came in, looked at him, and sat in the chair across the desk without being invited. She'd been doing this for 30 years and he'd stopped objecting decades ago. "Talk," she said. "Not tonight, Margaret. You've been not tonight for 4 days." She folded her hands in her lap. "Whatever it is, it's not getting quieter by itself." He looked at her. She was the one person in his world who looked back without the complicated arithmetic that everyone else brought. His grandmother had buried his grandfather and his father and had raised Vincent from 13 with the clear-eyed, unromantic love of a woman who understood exactly what the DeLuca name meant and had chosen to love him anyway. "Evelyn's back," he said. Margaret's face moved, just slightly. "Where?" "Working at the Grand. She changed her name." He paused. "She has a daughter." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. "How old?" Margaret said. 6. His grandmother looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at her hands. Then she looked back at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face in a very long time. Something careful and tired and sorrowful in a way that didn't have anything to do with blame. "Vincent," she said quietly, "what did you do?" "I told her to leave." He said it without inflection. 6 years ago. I told her she was a liability. She left. I didn't... He stopped. "I didn't know." "Did you try to know?" He didn't answer. Margaret closed her eyes briefly and opened them. "You have to find out for certain," she said, "before you do anything, before you involve anyone or make any move. You find out for certain, and then you decide what kind of man you are going to be about it." She stood. "That is the only thing that matters right now." He nodded once. She went to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, and said without turning, "The girl. What is she like?" He thought about the oak leaf in the coat pocket, the cupcake, the way she laughed. He stopped. "She's good, Margaret. She seems like she's really good." His grandmother stood there for a moment and then left without saying anything else. Vincent sat alone in his study and picked up the phone and then put it back down and then picked it up again, and finally dialed a number he hadn't used in 6 years. It rang twice. He'd half expected her to have changed the number, but she answered. And in the 2-second silence before either of them spoke, he could hear her breathing, and she could hear his, and across those 6 years, across everything, that silence said more than the conversation was going to. "I need to see you," he said. Evelyn was quiet for a moment that stretched. "I'm working a double tomorrow," she said finally. "I know. After. I'll come to you." He paused. "I'm not going to... I just need to talk." Another silence. He waited. "You should go through your lawyer," she said. "Whatever this is." "Evelyn." He said her name with no strategy in it, which was unusual for him. Just the name, just her. "Please." The line went quiet, for long enough that he thought she might have already hung up, and then she said very low, "Friday, 7 o'clock. Do not bring anyone with you." The line went dead. Vincent sat with the phone in his hand and the file locked in the drawer and the weight of 6 years of very wrong mathematics pressing down on every surface of the room. Outside the window, Manhattan kept going. It always kept going. That was the thing about this city. It did not pause for reckonings. It moved, and you moved inside it. And the distance between who you'd been and who you were going to have to become was something you crossed alone, usually in the dark, usually without a map. Friday was 2 days away. He had no idea what he was going to say. He had no idea how to say the thing that needed saying to a woman who had carried his daughter through 9 months of pregnancy and delivered her into the world and raised her, alone, in a city where one wrong conversation could have ended everything, who had done all of that while he was across town, running his empire, telling himself he'd made the right call. He didn't know how to be the man this conversation required him to be, but he was going to have to figure it out. Because on the other side of Friday was either the truth or the rest of his life, and those two things, he was beginning to understand, could not coexist. Somewhere in this city was a 6-year-old girl with his eyes who did not know his name, and that fact, that single, irreducible fact, had already changed every other fact around it, and there was no going back to the morning before he walked into the Hudson Grand. He opened the drawer. He looked at the birth certificate one more time. Father. Unknown. He closed the drawer and locked it and stood up from the desk. He went to the window. The city was doing what it did, all light and motion, and the particular indifference of a place that holds 10 million private catastrophes at once and doesn't blink. He stood there for a long time. And for the first time in 6 years, Vincent DeLuca was afraid. Not of exposure, not of consequences, not of the dozen competing interests that would move against him if they sensed weakness. He was afraid of a door, of standing in front of it on Friday evening with nothing in his hands, no leverage, no position, no carefully constructed approach, and knocking anyway. He was afraid of what Evelyn was going to see on his face when she opened it. He was afraid it was going to be the truth. And somewhere across this city, in an apartment he didn't have the address for yet, Charlotte Ann Vale was probably asleep with a school week behind her and the uncomplicated faith of a 6-year-old that the world was manageable and her mother was enough, that everything required for a life was already present and accounted for. She didn't know what Friday was going to mean, but Vincent was standing at the window of the house he'd built on power and control and the absolute certainty of his own judgment, and he was starting to understand that the most terrifying thing he had ever faced was not an enemy or a rival or a federal investigation. It was a door, and behind it, a woman who had every reason in the world to leave it closed. And what neither of them knew, what Charlotte, asleep across the city, could not possibly have known, was that Victoria Kensington had already made a phone call of her own. Not to Vincent, to someone else. Someone who dealt in information and who understood very precisely the market value of knowing exactly what Evelyn Harper was hiding. By morning, that someone would have a name, and by Friday, someone else would have Evelyn's address. The call came at 6 a.m. Friday. Not Vincent's call. Not the one Evelyn had been bracing for since she'd hung up on him 2 days ago. This one came from an unknown number, and she almost didn't answer it, and then something, instinct, or the particular anxiety of a woman who'd spent 6 years waiting for the other's shoe, made her pick up. Silence on the line. Then a man's voice, very even, very precise. Ms. Vale, or should I say, Mrs. DeLuca. She sat up in bed. The room was dark. From Charlotte's room, she could hear the soft, even sound of her daughter sleeping. "Who is this?" she said. "A friend," the voice said. "Of a mutual acquaintance. I'm calling to let you know that your arrangement, your quiet little life under a different name, has attracted some attention. Not from Vincent. From someone adjacent to Vincent. Someone who finds your existence inconvenient. What do you want?" "Nothing yet." A pause. "I simply want you to know that the clock is running. Whatever you're planning to do about the DeLuca situation, you should do it quickly." Another pause. "Have a good morning, Ms. Vale." The line went dead. Evelyn sat in the dark for a full minute, the phone in both hands, her thumbs pressed flat against the case. Then she got up, went to the window, and looked down at the street. Nothing unusual. A delivery truck. 2 people with coffee. The ordinary 6 a.m. texture of a Friday in her neighborhood. She stood there for a long time. Then she went to make Charlotte's breakfast. Madison Brooks arrived at the Hudson Grand at 9:45, 45 minutes before her shift, which was unusual enough that the bartender Marcus looked up from his prep and noted it without comment. She went straight to the back, found Evelyn rolling silverware at a corner table, and sat down across from her without asking. "Tell me what's happening," Madison said. Evelyn kept rolling silverware. "Good morning to you too, Evelyn." Madison put both elbows on the table and leaned forward. She was 31, sharp-featured, The kind of woman who'd survived a bad marriage and 2 layoffs and had come out of it with a very low tolerance for deflection. She'd been Evelyn's closest friend for 3 years, and she knew most of the story. Enough of it, anyway. Enough to look at Evelyn's face this morning and understand that something had shifted. "You look like you haven't slept in 2 days." "I slept." "You look like you did it badly." Evelyn set down the fork. She looked at the table for a moment. "Vincent called me." Madison went very still. "He wants to meet. Tonight." Evelyn picked up another fork. 7 o'clock. "And you said—" "I said yes." She kept her eyes on the silverware. "I don't know why I said yes." "I know why." Madison's voice was careful. "Because he's Charlotte's father, and you've been carrying that alone for 6 years, and part of you is exhausted." "Don't!" Evelyn's voice came out sharper than she intended. She set the fork down. "Don't make it about exhaustion. I made a decision 6 years ago. I made it for good reasons." "I know you did." "He told me I was a liability." She said it flat, the way you say a thing you've said inside your head 10,000 times. "He didn't ask me to leave. He didn't give me a choice to make. He just told me, like a business decision." "I know." "And I was 8 weeks pregnant." Her jaw was tight. "He didn't know that, because I found out 2 days after. But Madison, he looked me in the eye and he calculated the risk of keeping me around and he decided I wasn't worth it. That's who he is." Madison was quiet for a moment. "Is that still who he is?" Evelyn looked up. "I'm not defending him," Madison said quickly. "I'm genuinely asking because you said yes to tonight, and you don't do things without a reason." Evelyn looked back down at the table. "Someone called me this morning, before 6. They knew my real name. They knew about Charlotte." She paused. "They said Vincent wasn't the problem, that someone adjacent to him was." Madison's expression shifted. "Adjacent like—" "I don't know." She started rolling silverware again, her hands needing something to do. "But if someone's already found us, then the quiet arrangement I've been running for 5 years is done. It's just done. And if that's true, then trying to keep Charlotte away from Vincent to protect her, it might be the thing that leaves her unprotected." The logic of it sat there between them. Madison looked at her friend's hands, moving, steady, doing the small mechanical work of the job, and felt the particular helplessness of watching someone navigate a situation that had no clean exits. "What are you going to tell him?" Madison asked. "The truth," Evelyn said. "I'm going to tell him the truth, and then I'm going to see what he does with it. And if he takes her?" "He can't just take her." "Evelyn, he's Vincent DeLuca." Evelyn's hands went still. She looked up at Madison, and there was something in her eyes that wasn't fear exactly. Fear was too simple for it. It was the look of a woman who had done a calculation and arrived at a number she didn't like, and was deciding anyway. "I know who he is," she said. "I lived with him for 3 years. I know every version of him." She picked up the last fork. "Including the one that isn't in any file." Across town, in the DeLuca Mansion's East Wing, Victoria Kensington sat across from a man named Gerald Foss at a table in a private study that wasn't Vincent's. Gerald Foss was 62 years old, compact, unremarkable in appearance, and he had been the DeLuca family's legal counsel for 27 years. He was also, in the specific way of men who've held institutional power for long enough, deeply invested in the continuation of the arrangement that made him relevant. Victoria had a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. "He's going to see her tonight," she said. "I know." Gerald's voice was mild. He had a way of delivering information that made it sound like weather, a thing that was simply occurring, unattributable to any human decision. "He's been watching the child's school all week." "The child?" "Yes." Victoria looked at her coffee cup. Her face was composed in the way of someone who has decided that composure is armor and has worn it long enough that it no longer feels like a choice. "How certain are we?" "About paternity?" Gerald folded his hands. "We're not officially. Neither is he. That's presumably what tonight is about." "And if it's confirmed?" Gerald considered this question with the thoroughness of a man billing by the hour. "Then the landscape changes. Significantly. An heir changes inheritance structures. It changes Vincent's relationship to the family's legitimate holdings. It changes—" He paused. his relationship to the criminal operations, in terms of his calculus around risk. A man with a child he loves becomes a different kind of risk profile than a man without one. He becomes vulnerable, Victoria said. He becomes human, Gerald said, which, in this context, amounts to the same thing. Victoria looked at him for a moment. The call this morning. To the woman. A nudge, Gerald said, to accelerate the timeline. The longer this remains unresolved, the longer Vincent is, he paused, distracted, unpredictable. The Beretti negotiation is stalling. There are 3 outstanding decisions on the New Jersey operation. He hasn't been present for any of them. You're worried about the business. I'm worried about stability. He said it gently. The DeLuca operation has survived for 40 years on discipline and predictability. When the man at the center becomes unpredictable, what exactly did you say to her? Victoria's voice had gone flat. Gerald met her eyes. Enough to make her feel the urgency. A silence stretched between them. Victoria looked at the window, at the gray November light coming through. If she goes to him tonight, Victoria said, and he confirms what he suspects, what happens to our position? Our position, Gerald said, depends on what Vincent decides he wants. If he wants the child, he'll want the mother in proximity. Proximity means a renegotiation of all existing arrangements. He looked at her with the mild, impersonal attention of a man who has delivered bad news so many times that the delivering of it has become emotionally neutral. Which would include yours. Victoria stood up. She smoothed her jacket. She picked up her coffee cup and set it down on the tray and said nothing for a long moment. I want to know the moment he leaves that apartment tonight, she finally said. Whatever happens inside it, I want to know. Gerald nodded once. Victoria left the room without looking back. In the hallway, she stopped, stood against the wall, and for approximately 8 seconds allowed herself to feel the particular thing she felt, which was not precisely jealousy and was not precisely fear, but was the sensation of a structure she'd spent 2 years carefully constructing beginning to shift at its foundation. Then she straightened and walked down the hall, and her face was composed again by the time she reached the stairs. But at 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, Charlotte discovered the man outside the school. She had been let out at 3:15, and Evelyn, held by a late lunch rush, had called Marcus to ask if Charlotte could sit at the bar again, which Charlotte considered among the better outcomes of any school day. Marcus gave her a Shirley Temple with extra cherries and let her draw on the back of old order tickets. And at 4 o'clock he looked up and realized she'd slipped off the bar stool, and he found her standing at the front window, looking out. Hey, Char, what you looking at? That man, she said. She pointed, direct, uninhibited, no social filter yet installed, at the black sedan parked across the street. He was outside my school on Wednesday. Marcus came around the bar. He looked. The sedan was unremarkable, tinted windows, the engine possibly running. Could be nothing. Could be a driver waiting. But Marcus had worked at the Grand for 7 years and had a working familiarity with the kinds of people who ate there and the kinds of attention those people sometimes required, and something about the stillness of the car made him put his hand on Charlotte's shoulder. Come on back to the bar, he said. I'll make you another Shirley Temple. But why is he always looking at the school? Probably waiting for someone. He steered her gently. Come on. Charlotte went. She took her Shirley Temple and went back to her drawings, and Marcus went into the back and texted Evelyn. There's a car been outside a few days, prob nothing. Thought you should know. He described it. Evelyn read the text on her break, standing in the back corridor with her phone and her coat, and 5 minutes before she had to be back on the floor. She looked at the description of the car and felt something cold move through her chest. Not Vincent. Vincent drove himself in a nondescript sedan this week. She'd checked, the way she always checked. This was a second car. This was someone else. She put her phone in her pocket and went back to work with her face neutral and her hands steady, and something moving through her that wasn't going to be productive to feel until her shift was over. Vincent arrived at her building at 6:58. He'd driven himself. No detail. The nondescript black sedan again, which he'd parked 2 blocks away because he was still capable of certain cautions, even when operating outside his normal discipline. He walked the 2 blocks in the November dark with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath making small clouds in the cold air, and he stood in front of her building. A 4-story walk-up on the west side, clean, modest, the kind of building where people lived privately and minded their business. And he stood there for a moment before he buzzed. The intercom crackled, then her voice, flat and stripped of everything. "Third floor." The door buzzed open. The stairwell smelled like old wood and someone's cooking. Garlic, maybe. It was the smell of a building where people actually lived, where ordinary life happened at ordinary volume, and Vincent moved through it like a wrong note in a familiar song. He reached the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. He knocked. A pause. Then the sound of a lock. She opened the door and he had a half-second to register the space behind her before she filled his field of vision completely. She'd changed out of her work clothes, dark jeans, a gray sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been tired for years and was managing it with practiced efficiency. She looked, in the specific and destabilizing way of things he'd tried hard not to think about, like herself. "Charlotte's at the neighbors," she said. "Mrs. Park. She thinks I have a work thing." "Okay. You have an hour." He stepped inside. She stepped back to let him, and then moved into the living room without offering him anything. No coffee, no sit down, nothing that would make this more domestic than it needed to be. He noted the apartment with the automatic attention he applied to all spaces. Small, well organized. Charlotte's drawings were on the refrigerator. A school schedule was tacked to the wall near the front door. There were books stacked on a coffee table and a throw blanket on the couch that was slightly askew, lived in. Everything in the space was functional and specific, and said a woman had built this without help and built it well. He sat on the edge of a chair. He didn't take his jacket off. Evelyn stood by the far wall with her arms crossed, not defensive, more contained, like something that was holding its shape through will. "Start," she said. "Charlotte," he said, "don't. I'm not going to—" He stopped. He started again, more carefully. "I'm not here to threaten anything. I'm not here to make demands. He put his hands on his knees, which was the most exposed position he'd allowed himself in years. "I need to know." "What do you need to know, Vincent?" Her voice was level. "You want me to confirm what you've already figured out, so I'll confirm it." "Yes. Charlotte is your daughter. She was conceived before I left. I found out after. I made a choice not to tell you." She held his gaze without flinching. "There. You know." The room was quiet. Vincent sat with it. He'd thought he was ready for it. He'd spent a week preparing for it, and now that it was in the room, actually present, he understood that there was no preparation for the specific weight of it. Charlotte was his. 6 years old and drawing pictures on bar receipts and collecting oak leaves, and already, from what he could see, a more fully realized human being than he had ever managed to be, and she had gotten that way entirely without him. "Why?" he said. "Why what?" "Why didn't you tell me?" He said it without accusation. He needed to be very careful here, and he knew it. "I understand why you left. I understand—" He stopped. "I said things to you that I—" He stopped again. "Why didn't you tell me about the pregnancy?" She unfolded her arms. She came and sat on the far end of the couch, not close, but in the room with him. She looked at her hands for a moment. "Because I was terrified," she said. "Not of you specifically. Of what my life would look like if I had a child connected to you. What her life would look like." She looked up. "Do you understand what it means to be adjacent to you, Vincent? To have your name attached to you? I watched what it did to people. To Marco's family. To the Caselli kids. Your world doesn't let people leave cleanly." She paused. "I thought if I disappeared completely, if Charlotte had no connection to you at all, she'd be safe. She'd have a chance at something ordinary. She's been living under a different name." "Yes." 5 years. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Someone called you this morning." Her expression shifted. Small, controlled shift, but he caught it. "How do you know about that?" "Because I had the building watched. Not to surveil you, to make sure no one else was." He held her gaze. "Someone called you at 6 a.m., unknown number, male voice. That wasn't me." Something moved across her face. "Then who—" "I don't know yet. I'm working on it." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "But Evelyn, if someone else already has your real name and address, Then whatever arrangement you've been running isn't intact anymore. You understand that? She looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. I understand that, she said quietly. I understood it at 6 this morning. Then you understand why we need to... Don't. Her voice had an edge now. Don't tell me what we need. Don't walk in here after 6 years and start managing the situation. That's not... She stopped, collected herself. I'll handle the security concerns. On my own terms. Tonight was about Charlotte. So talk about Charlotte. He sat back. He nodded. He gave her that. I've been watching her, he said. It came out more raw than he intended. At the school. In the mornings. I know that's... He stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds like something you should have asked permission for. I know. She's not a surveillance target, Vincent. I know. He met her eyes. I needed to see her. Before I said anything to you, before I did anything, I needed to... He stopped, and the thing that happened to his voice was not something he could control entirely. She picked up an oak leaf and put it in her pocket. Tuesday morning, and she stopped to say good morning to the gate attendant by name. He shook his head. I just sat there in the car and watched her and thought about 6 years I didn't... He stopped. The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at him. She had braced for many versions of this conversation. The version where he threatened. The version where he lawyered up immediately. The version where he was cold and calculating and she could keep her own walls up without effort. She had not entirely prepared for the version where he sat in her living room with his hands on his knees and his voice doing that. She asked about you, Evelyn said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out anyway. Vincent looked up. Not about you specifically. She doesn't know you exist. Evelyn looked at the coffee table. But she's 6. She sees other kids with fathers. She asks questions. Not constantly, she's not fixated on it, but she asks. She paused. I told her your job made it complicated. I told her you lived far away. She looked up at him. I told her you didn't know about her, which is true. He nodded. Something moved through his face. Vincent, she said his name carefully. If we do this, if we open this door, I need you to understand something. She is not collateral. She is not leverage. She is not a piece in anything. If you come into her life and then something happens, if your world touches her in any way that puts her at risk... She stopped. Her voice had gone very quiet and very serious. I will disappear again, and this time I will do it better. I know, he said. Do you? Yes. He looked at her with the particular directness of a man who has spent a week doing an accounting of himself and found the numbers ugly. Evelyn, I know. I know what I said to you. I know what I did. I'm not going to stand here and ask you to forgive it or explain it away or... I made a decision 6 years ago and I was wrong. Not strategically wrong. Wrong. He paused. I haven't said that to anyone in my life, maybe ever, but I'm saying it to you. She looked at him for a long moment. The apartment was quiet around them, the sounds of the building coming through. Someone's TV above them, a door somewhere. The city outside. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Her face changed. She stood up. What? Vincent said. She turned the phone toward him. It was a text from an unknown number. No message, just a photograph. The photograph was of Charlotte, taken today. At the bar of the Hudson Grand, drawing on receipt paper, a Shirley Temple in front of her, taken from outside through the window, close enough to be detailed. Professional enough to be unmistakable. Someone had been watching Charlotte today. Someone had been close enough to take that photograph and wanted them to know it. Evelyn's hand was steady, but her face had gone the color of old paper, and Vincent was already on his feet, already reaching for his phone, because the calculation had just changed. Everything had just changed. And the hour she'd given him was over before it had properly begun, replaced by something else entirely. Something that had Charlotte's face in it, and no room at all for anything except what happened next. Vincent made one call, not to his security chief, not to Carlo. He called a number that existed in no contact list on any phone he owned, a number he held only in memory, the way you hold the combination to a safe you hope you never need to open. It rang once. I need eyes on a child, he said. Whitmore Academy girl Charlotte Vale, currently at apartment 3B, this address. He read the address from the buzzer panel he'd noted on the way in. Nobody touches her. Nobody gets within 20 feet. I want to know the moment anyone else is watching." He hung up. The whole call took 11 seconds. Evelyn was still holding the phone. She hadn't moved. The photograph was still on the screen. Charlotte at the bar, the Shirley Temple, the receipt paper drawings, all of it framed through glass by someone who had been standing on the sidewalk outside the Grand at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and had wanted them to know they were capable of this. "Who has your address?" Vincent said. "Nobody." Her voice was controlled but thin. "I've been careful. 5 years. Nobody from before." "Someone has it. I know that." She set the phone face down on the coffee table. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs. "Marcus texted me at 4. Said there was a car outside the restaurant, watching." She looked up. "I thought it was you." "It wasn't." "I know that now." He was already moving through the apartment, not searching, cataloging, the windows, the door, the layout, the exits. It was automatic. The way breathing was automatic, and he was doing it before he'd consciously decided to do it. And some part of him registered that this was the first time in 6 years that the instincts he'd built over a decade had a target that mattered to him personally. "Pack a bag," he said. "You and Charlotte, tonight." She stood up. "Excuse me, not permanently. A week, 2. Until I find out who sent that photograph and why." He turned to face her. "Evelyn, someone is using Charlotte to send a message. To me, to you, to both of us. I don't know who yet, but they know her face. They know where she goes after school. They know your address, your real address, the one you've had for 5 years under a name that should have been clean." He paused. "This is not a small thing." "I know it's not a small thing." Her voice had an edge that could cut. "Don't explain my own situation to me. I'm not... You walked into my life 4 days ago, and now you're standing in my living room telling me to pack a bag and come with you." She squared up to him. Not close, but direct, the way she always had been when she was angry. That absolute refusal to shrink. "That is exactly the thing I spent 6 years preventing." "I understand that." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, the threat arrived the same week you did." The sentence landed between them. Vincent didn't move. He took it, the way he'd taken the birth certificate and the oak leaf and her voice on the phone 2 nights ago, absorbing it instead of deflecting. "You're right," he said. She hadn't expected that. "You're right," he said again, more evenly. "The timing is not a coincidence. Someone found you because I was looking, because I wasn't careful enough about how I was looking, and someone in my orbit picked up the thread." He held her gaze. "That's on me. I know that. But the threat is real regardless of how it started. And Charlotte..." He stopped. "She's 6 years old. Whatever is between us, whatever I did, whatever you've been protecting her from, she doesn't get to be the one who pays for any of it." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face. Not forgiveness, not trust, but the cold arithmetic of a woman choosing between her pride and her daughter's safety. "Where?" she said. "The Westport House, Connecticut. It's not on any DeLuca Holdings filing. I bought it through a separate entity 8 years ago. Nobody in my current operation knows it exists." "Nobody in your current..." She stopped. "What does that mean? Who in your past operation?" He almost told her it didn't matter. He caught himself. "One person, my lawyer, Gerald Foss." He watched her face. "He's been with the family for 27 years. Something shifted in Evelyn's expression. Fractional, fast, gone before he could fully read it. "I'll get Charlotte," she said. Mrs. Park from 3A was 70 years old and had been watching Charlotte for 2 years on Evelyn's late shifts, and she handed the little girl over at the door with the particular combination of warmth and no questions that made her invaluable. Charlotte came out in her pajamas with her backpack, which she apparently took everywhere, and stopped when she saw Vincent standing in the hallway. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're the sad man," she said. Behind her, Mrs. Park's eyebrows moved. Evelyn put a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "Come on, baby." "He was outside my school," Charlotte said. Not accusatory, factual, the way 6-year-olds report observations. "And he was at the restaurant where you work." She looked at Vincent with the direct assessment of a child who hasn't yet learned to perform social uncertainty. Why do you keep being in places? Vincent crouched. It put him at her eye level. He was aware of how ridiculous he probably looked. A man in a $3,000 jacket crouching in a dim hallway of a walk-up apartment building at 7:30 on a Friday night. He was aware of all of it, and he did it anyway. I was hoping to meet you, he said. Charlotte considered this. You could have just said hi. You're right, I should have. She studied him for another moment. Then she said, Are we going somewhere? If that's okay with you. She looked up at her mother, assessing permissions. Evelyn crouched too and spoke quietly. Something about a little trip, a house with a yard, just for a few days. Charlotte's face did the fast, uncomplicated arithmetic of a child. Yard, few days, her mother saying so. Good enough. Okay, she said, and went back into Mrs. Park's apartment to get her coat. They drove in his car. Charlotte fell asleep in the back seat somewhere on the I-95 North, her head against the window, her backpack clutched to her chest. Evelyn sat in the front and looked at the road, and they didn't speak for most of the drive because there was too much to say, and none of it was for Charlotte to hear, even in sleep. An hour into the drive, Evelyn said quietly, Gerald Foss. Vincent kept his eyes on the road. What about him? He handled the paperwork when I left. The settlement, the NDA. She said it carefully. He was the only person besides you who knew I was leaving, the only one who had any documentation. He was doing his job. He was. She paused. Did he know I was pregnant? Vincent looked at her. No, no one knew that. But he would have had access to the legal records afterward, if he was looking. She turned back to the road. A man who's been with your family for 27 years would know how to look for things quietly. Gerald doesn't have a reason to. Someone called me at 6 this morning. She kept her voice flat. Someone who knew my real name and knew about Charlotte and wanted me spooked enough to accelerate whatever was going to happen tonight. She paused. Who benefits from that? From you and me being pushed together quickly in a way that looks messy and emotional instead of controlled? Vincent drove. He thought about this with the particular part of his mind that he usually reserved for the moments before a business decision collapsed. The part that sorted through the available information without sentiment and looked for what was actually there instead of what he'd assumed. Someone who wanted this to move fast. Someone who wanted Vincent distracted and reactive. Someone adjacent to his operation with access to information that should have been buried, who had an interest in the DeLuca future that predated Charlotte's existence. He thought about Gerald Foss in that private study. He thought about Victoria's call. He thought about the timing, the call to Evelyn at 6 a.m., the photograph at 4 p.m., the escalating pressure of a Friday that had started as a private conversation and become something else entirely. I need to make a call, he said. It's almost 9. I know. He called Strand. Strand answered on the second ring in the way of men who'd agreed to be available and meant it. The call to Evelyn's phone this morning, Vincent said. 6 a.m., unknown number. Find it, tonight. A pause. That's a few hours of work. Then start now. He hung up. Charlotte shifted in the back seat, resettled, kept sleeping. Evelyn watched the dark road. What aren't you telling me? She said. Not angry, flat and precise. He was quiet for a moment. Victoria Kensington. He felt Evelyn go still beside him rather than saw it. She knew about you within 48 hours of me seeing you at the Grand, he said. She called me. She said she was hearing things. She was careful, diplomatic. She said she was telling me as a friend. He paused. But she knew your name, your real name, Evelyn, not the veil name. She said Evelyn Harper. I didn't notice it at the time. Evelyn turned to look at him. In the dark of the car, her face was unreadable. She's known the whole time, Evelyn said. I don't know that. If she knows my real name, if she had it before you even told her I was back, then someone gave it to her. And the only person with access to your old files, your legal documentation from 6 years ago, the paperwork from when I left, Gerald, Vincent said. Gerald, she said. The Westport house was on 3 wooded acres set back from a private road, gray-shingled, modest from the front, and larger than it appeared. Vincent had bought it for reasons he'd never entirely articulated even to himself. A place outside the city's sightlines, a place that didn't appear in the DeLuca ledger. He'd come here perhaps 6 times in 8 years. It smelled like unoccupied house and wood and the particular cold of Connecticut November, and he turned the heat on and found clean sheets in the linen closet and made up a bed for Charlotte, while Evelyn stood in the kitchen with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup and looked out the window at nothing. Charlotte woke up when he carried her from the car. She looked at the house and looked at the dark trees and said, "Is there a yard?" "In the morning," he said. "You can see it in the morning." She seemed to accept this as a reasonable deferral and went back to sleep in the made-up bed with her backpack on the floor beside her and her coat pulled up over the blanket, which Evelyn gently extracted without waking her. Vincent was in the kitchen when Evelyn came back out. He had coffee going. He hadn't slept in approximately 36 hours, and he felt it in the specific way of a man past the first wave of exhaustion. Too alert, edges too sharp, the world slightly too bright. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the coffee pot. "Tell me about Gerald Foss," she said. "He's been with the family since before my father died. He handles everything that needs handling, legitimate and otherwise. He's cautious. He doesn't make moves without covering them." "Does he know about the Connecticut house?" I said he didn't. "Does he?" Vincent poured 2 cups. He set one in front of her. He sat down. "He knows I own property outside the city. He doesn't have the address. It's in a different entity." He paused. "We're safe here tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow I find out who made that call and who took that photograph, and I find out how much they know and what they want." His voice was flat and certain in the way it was when he was done with the part of a situation that required feeling things and had arrived at the part that required action. "And then I address it." "Address it." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "What does that mean in your vocabulary?" "It means I remove the threat. Permanently." He looked at her. "Does it matter?" She looked back at him steadily. "It matters to me. It matters for Charlotte. I don't want her growing up in a life where things get addressed. I didn't want that 6 years ago, and I don't want it now." "Evelyn, I'm not being naive." Her voice was hard and clear. "I know what you are. I knew what you were when I married you. I don't have illusions about this. But if you're going to be in Charlotte's life, I need to know what version of you that is. I need to know what she's inheriting." He sat with that for a moment. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the honest answer. I don't know what I'm willing to change, but I know she changes the calculation." He looked at his coffee. "I know that for certain." She nodded. They sat in silence for a moment, which was not comfortable but was honest, which was something. His phone rang. Strand. He answered immediately. "The 6 a.m. call," Strand said. "Prepaid cell. Purchased 3 weeks ago in Midtown. Cash transaction. No camera on the register." A pause. "But I traced the cell tower activity for the last 3 weeks and got lucky. The phone was used once before this morning, 6 days ago. Made one call to a landline registered to an LLC called Fordham Advisory Group." Vincent went very still. "Say that again." "Fordham Advisory Group, LLC, registered in Delaware, but the operating address on file is 2214 Park Avenue, Suite 900, Vincent said. "That's right." Strand's voice was careful. "You know it?" "That's Gerald Foss's office." A silence. "Vincent," Strand's voice had changed register. "That's not all. The photograph that was sent to the woman's phone tonight. I had a contact pull the metadata. It was sent from a device registered to a burner account, but the EXIF data wasn't fully stripped. The image was taken on a device that had previously connected to a Wi-Fi network." He paused. "The network name is DL Holdings-Private. That's your building's internal network, Vincent. Your office building." The kitchen was very quiet. The coffee pot made a small sound. Somewhere deeper in the house, Charlotte made a small sound in her sleep. Evelyn was watching his face. She had gone very still. Vincent set his phone on the table. He looked at it. Then he looked at Evelyn and she read his face and said, "What?" "Gerald," he said. "It was Gerald." She closed her eyes, just for a second, then opened them. "Your family's lawyer," she said. 27 years. 27 years. His voice was very flat. "He's been running this. The call to you. The photograph. All of it." He paused. The question is why? Gerald doesn't move without a reason. He doesn't take risks without... He stopped. Something moved through his face. Victoria. What about her? He stood up. He walked to the counter and stood there with his back to her, and she could see the set of his shoulders, the way something was working through him that he was holding very still against. Victoria has been positioning herself for 2 years, he said. Not romantically. I never gave her. I never made her promises. But she's been present at every significant event, every major family decision, every public function. She's been building a case for relevance. He turned around. His face had gone the way it went when he'd arrived at a calculation he didn't like. If Charlotte is confirmed as my heir, if there's a child, a legitimate child with my blood, that changes everything about the succession structure of the DeLuca holdings, both the legitimate and the not. He paused. It would cut Victoria out entirely, of everything she spent 2 years positioning for. So Gerald took a photograph of a 6-year-old, Evelyn said. Her voice had gone ice cold. To do what with it? To control the timeline. To make me feel threatened. To make you feel threatened. To push us both into making decisions too fast, under pressure, in ways that could be documented or used or... He stopped. Gerald has been the family lawyer for 27 years. He has files on everything. Every decision, every arrangement, every person. If this goes wrong, if Charlotte becomes public before I've secured the legal structure, before I've... He looked at her. He could use her as leverage against me. Evelyn stood up slowly. She set the coffee cup down and she looked at him, and he could see her doing the same calculation he was doing, running the numbers, arriving at the same place. He knows about this house, she said. I told you he doesn't... Vincent. Her voice cut through. Think. 27 years. You bought this property through a separate entity. Who set up that entity? He opened his mouth. And then he didn't say anything. Because the entity, the shell company that held the Westport property in a name with no DeLuca in it, had been structured by a small firm in Stamford that Gerald had recommended 8 years ago, a routine referral. They used the same accountant. Evelyn watched his face and saw the moment he understood, and she didn't say I told you so, because this was not the moment for that. Instead, she said very quietly, how long before someone could get here from the city? He looked at his watch. It was 9:47 p.m. An hour, he said. 90 minutes if there's traffic. They looked at each other across the kitchen of the house that was not as safe as he had believed it to be, and Charlotte was asleep down the hall, and somewhere in the city Gerald Foss was either already moving or about to. And Vincent DeLuca, who had built a life on the absolute certainty of his own judgment, who had never once doubted the infrastructure of his world, was standing in a kitchen in Connecticut at 9:47 on a Friday night, understanding that the man he'd trusted for 27 years had been the most dangerous thing in the room all along. We need to leave, Evelyn said. We need to leave now, he said, and was already moving toward the hallway where... Vincent was already moving toward the hallway where Charlotte slept when his phone lit up with a text from Strand. 2 vehicles left the city 40 minutes ago. I-95 North. I'm sorry, I just found it. 40 minutes. He'd been sitting in that kitchen for 40 minutes, drinking coffee and doing math, and they had been already on the road. He didn't say anything out loud. He went to Charlotte's room. She was curled on her side with one hand under her cheek and the backpack on the floor, and she looked the way sleeping children look, completely elsewhere, completely trusting, completely undefended. He stood in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds. Then he went back to the kitchen. They're already coming, he said. 40 minutes out, maybe less. Evelyn didn't make a sound. She picked up her coffee cup, set it in the sink, turned around. Her face was the face of a woman who had spent 6 years preparing for a version of this. Not this exactly, not the specifics, but the general shape of it, the shape of her past arriving with headlights on a dark road. Get Charlotte, she said. I'll get our bags. Evelyn, get Charlotte. Her voice was not loud and it was not slow. It was the voice of someone who had already processed the fear and was operating on the other side of it. We'll talk in the car. Go. He went. Charlotte woke when he lifted her with the confused, soft resistance of a child pulled out of deep sleep. She made a sound, not quite a word, and he said quietly, Hey, it's okay. We're taking a drive. She blinked at him. He was a near stranger, and she was 6, and it was the middle of the night, and she should have been frightened, but she looked at his face in the dark, and something there, he didn't know what, something she'd decided, made her put her head against his shoulder. His chest did something he had no capacity to process right now. He carried her to the car. Evelyn came out 2 minutes later with both bags and Charlotte's coat and her own, and she put everything in the back and got in the passenger seat and said, "Which way?" "Back toward the city, not away. They'll expect away." He had the engine running already. "There's a property in Stamford, not mine. It belongs to a man named Ray Pollock, old associate. He owes me from something 6 years ago, and he's been living quiet in Sarasota since. House has been empty for 2 years. I have a key. You have a key to an empty house in Stamford. I have keys to a lot of things." He pulled out of the driveway without headlights until he reached the road, then turned them on and turned south. "It buys us until morning, until I can get Strand to sweep for who else Gerald's got moving." In the back seat, Charlotte had gone back to sleep with her coat pulled over her and her cheek pressed against the window. Evelyn watched the dark road, and her jaw was set, and her hands were in her lap. "Call your grandmother," she said. He glanced at her. "Margaret needs to know," Evelyn said. "If Gerald's moving against you, he'll move against the whole house. She's in that house, Vincent." He called Margaret. It rang 4 times, which told him she was asleep, which she almost never was before midnight, which told him it was later than it felt. She answered on the 5th ring with a voice that was sharp the way she always was, sleep or not. "Something's happened," he said. "I need you to go to Elena's tonight." Elena was Margaret's sister, the only person in the extended family that Gerald Foss had never been formally introduced to. "Don't tell Carla, don't tell the night staff, don't call anyone from the house phone. Take your cell and go. Now." A pause. "How bad?" "Bad enough." Another pause. "Is she with you?" He looked at the road. "Yes." "And the child?" "Yes." "Then go." Her voice was entirely steady, the way it had been steady at the worst moments of his entire life. "Go and fix it. I'll be at Elena's." She hung up. Vincent put the phone in his jacket pocket and drove. The Stamford house was a 2-story colonial on a dead-end street, brown shutters and an overgrown front hedge that had been optimistic when Pollock moved in and had since gone feral. Vincent got the key from under the back porch step where it had been for 2 years and let them in through the kitchen door. The house smelled like shut-up air and old carpet and the particular sadness of abandoned domestic spaces. He did a room-by-room check-in 40 seconds, old habit, and found nothing. He settled Charlotte on the couch in the front room with her coat as a blanket, and she didn't fully wake, and he stood over her for a moment and then went back to the kitchen where Evelyn was standing at the counter. "Sit down," he said. "I don't want to sit down." "Evelyn." He said it quietly. "Sit down for 10 minutes. Just 10. She sat. He found a light above the stove that was less exposing than the overhead and turned it on. The kitchen was yellow and small, and someone had left a coffee mug in the drainer 2 years ago. He leaned against the opposite counter and looked at her. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked up at him. "Gerald has been with the family since before my father died. When my father died, I was 24 and I had a criminal operation I'd inherited and a legitimate business I barely understood, and Gerald was the one he was the architecture. He built the legal structure that kept everything running, the filings, the LLCs, the offshore accounts, the legitimate front companies." He paused. "I trusted him the way you trust a wall, without checking whether the wall was still load-bearing. What does he want? Control." He said it flatly. "The DeLuca holdings are worth approximately $2 billion in legitimate assets alone. The criminal side adds another layer that doesn't appear on paper, but is real money. Gerald has been the custodian of that structure for 27 years. If there's an heir, a confirmed heir, the succession documents get redrawn. Gerald's position as executor, as trustee, as the man who controls the flow of assets in the event of my incapacitation or death." He paused. "A 6-year-old changes every single one of those documents. A 6-year-old gives him less control, not more. So he wants Charlotte to not exist," Evelyn said. Her voice was absolutely flat. "Legally. or to exist in a way he can manage, a paternity dispute he controls, a custody arrangement where he's the legal architect, a situation where Charlotte's claim is perpetually unresolved. He looked at her. He doesn't want her gone. He wants her status ambiguous, indefinitely. And the photograph was a demonstration. He's saying, I can get to her, I can document her, I can use her whenever I choose. He moved away from the counter. He sat down across from her. He's been running me for 27 years. He knows exactly how I respond to a threat. He expected me to panic, to move fast, to make decisions under pressure that I'd have to come to him to untangle. His jaw was tight. He expected me to call him tonight. Did you? No. She looked at him. He's going to escalate. Yes? How far? He looked at her directly. As far as he needs to. Gerald Foss has spent 27 years watching men in my family make decisions. He knows what we do when we're cornered. He knows how to make us feel cornered. He paused. But he doesn't know about you. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? He knows Evelyn Harper came back. He knows about Charlotte. He knows I've been watching the school and that we met tonight. But he doesn't know... He stopped. Chose the words carefully. He built his model on the version of me that existed 6 years ago. Cold, contained. A man who makes decisions based on power and liability. He looked at her. He doesn't have a model for this. She looked at him for a moment. That's not a plan, Vincent. It's the beginning of one. His phone vibrated. Strand. He answered. Tell me. Second vehicle peeled off the I-95. One car continued to the Westport address. My guy watching the road says it arrived 8 minutes ago. A pause. 2 men went in. They're in there now. Vincent looked at Evelyn. She was watching his face. And the second vehicle? He said. That's the problem. Strand's voice was careful. It went back south, city-bound. And Vincent, I pulled the registration on both cars. Same shell company, but the second car was taken out of the pool by Gerald's office assistant 3 hours ago. Signed out to a destination listed as... A pause. Hudson Grand Restaurant. The air in the kitchen changed. That doesn't make sense, Vincent said. The Grand is closed. It's almost 11... Not the restaurant. The apartment 2 blocks north of it. Strand's voice was very flat now. Someone gave them what looks like a prior address for the Vale residence. An old one, before she moved. A pause. But there's a name on the lease of that old address, Vincent. Still on file as an emergency contact from when she lived there. A Madison Brooks. Evelyn had her phone out. She was already dialing. He watched her face go through 3 seconds of ringing and then go absolutely white. She's not answering, she said. Evelyn, Madison is not answering her phone. She stood up. The chair scraped back. She lives 2 blocks from the restaurant. She lives 2 blocks from my old apartment. If they went to the wrong address and found her, we don't know that. Call your man. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. Just enough. Call your man and tell him to go there right now. He called Strand back. He gave him the address. He watched Evelyn stand at the kitchen window staring out at nothing, her phone pressed against her sternum, and he watched her shoulders do the thing shoulders do when someone is holding themselves together through force alone. Strand called back in 4 minutes. Vincent answered on the first ring and listened for 11 seconds without saying anything. Then he said, How bad? Listened. Get her to Mercy General, use the name Park, first name Anna. I'll call ahead. He hung up. Evelyn turned from the window. She's alive, he said immediately. She's conscious. She surprised them, and they pushed her down, and she hit her head on the counter. She's shaken. She has a cut. She's probably got a concussion. He held Evelyn's gaze. She's alive, and she's talking. Evelyn made a sound that wasn't a word. She turned back to the window and pressed one hand flat against the glass and stood there for a moment. And he watched her absorb it. The specific relief and the specific guilt of someone whose friend was hurt because of something that originated in their life. This is Gerald, she said. Her voice had gone somewhere cold and clean. This is Gerald deciding that people around me are leverage. Yes, she turned. Her face in the low stove light was the face he remembered from 6 years ago at the worst moments. Not broken, nothing like broken, but stripped of everything except the core of her, the part that decided things. I want to be in the room when you deal with him, she said. Evelyn, I want to be in the room. Her eyes didn't move. He put his hands on my friend. He used Charlotte's face as a message. He has spent, since 6 a.m. this morning, he has spent all day treating my life like a piece of your problem to be managed. Her voice was steady and merciless. I want to be in the room. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Charlotte stays somewhere safe, he said. Margaret's sister. Elena will take her. She's good with kids. Charlotte won't. Charlotte will be fine with Elena. She crossed her arms. What's the play? He turned it over. The architecture of it. Gerald would expect him to go to ground, to protect and wait, to let the night run out and then come to him in the morning through lawyers and the formal structures that Gerald controlled. That's what Vincent of 6 years ago would have done. He would have retreated into the defensive position and let Gerald set the terms. He wasn't doing that. Gerald will be at his office in the morning, Vincent said. He goes in at 7 regardless of what happened the night before. 27 years, he's missed one morning, his wife's funeral. He's there at 7 and he has his first coffee and he reads the overnight reports and he waits for whoever he's been running to call him. He paused. We'll be there at 6:50. And Victoria, Evelyn said. Victoria is a different problem. Victoria is the same problem. If she's been coordinating with Gerald, she's not dirty the same way he is. He moved toward the hall. She's ambitious. She made a calculation. She provided Gerald with information and told herself it was just information. He paused. She didn't know about Madison. She didn't know it would go physical. That's not... Victoria doesn't have the stomach for that. You sure about that? He stopped. He thought about it honestly, which was the only way to think about anything right now. 70%, he said. That's not sure. No, he said. It's not. He looked back at her. But I've been 100% sure about exactly 2 things in the last week. One was Charlotte. He held her gaze. The other was that coming to your door on Friday was the only right thing I've done in 6 years. She looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Charlotte made a sound from the front room, a small sleep sound. Nothing alarmed. Evelyn said, Don't do that. Don't do what? Don't say things like that right now, when everything's on fire and I'm scared and Madison's in a hospital. Her voice was controlled and hard-edged. Say it when everything's not on fire. If you still mean it, then. He nodded. Fair. Go check on Charlotte. She straightened. I'll figure out what to tell her in the morning. He went to the front room. Charlotte was on her back now, one arm out, the coat blanket half off. He pulled it back up. She stirred without waking, and her hand closed briefly around 2 of his fingers, reflexive, the grip of someone holding on in sleep, and he sat on the edge of the coffee table and stayed there for a moment with his fingers inside her small grip. 6 years. 6 years of school mornings and oak leaves and cupcakes and friendship bracelets that he hadn't seen and hadn't known to look for. 6 years of Evelyn doing this alone. The staying up and the lunches and the nightmares and the scraped knees and all the ordinary weight of keeping a person alive and loved and pointed in the right direction. He sat with it. He didn't look away from it. Then he gently extracted his fingers, stood up, and went to find his phone. At 2:17 a.m., he called a number in the city. The man who answered was named Conti, and he owed Vincent something that couldn't be expressed in money and had been waiting 3 years to pay it. I need the 6th floor of the Foss building cleared by 6:30 tomorrow morning, Vincent said. Staff, security, cameras. I need the floor empty and I need Gerald Foss to walk in at 7 and find it that way. Conti said, And then I'll handle the rest myself. He paused. No one gets hurt. No one except Gerald has any idea what's happening. Can you do that? Conti said yes. Conti said bounce. Vincent hung up. He sat in the dark kitchen of Ray Pollack's empty house in Stamford, Connecticut, and he looked at the cold coffee mug in the drainer and he thought about 27 years and the specific shape of a betrayal that had been structural, that had been in the walls the whole time. And the thing he felt was not rage. Not yet. It would become rage. But right now it was something colder and more precise and considerably more dangerous. He was going to walk into that office in 4 hours and 20 minutes, and Gerald Foss was going to look at him and understand, for the first time in 27 years, that the man across the desk was no longer the version of himself that Gerald had been managing. That version was gone. What had replaced it was sitting in a strange kitchen in the middle of the night with a 6-year-old's handprint still warm on his fingers and stood up and went back to the kitchen and began to plan. He drove to the Foss building alone. He'd left Evelyn a note on the kitchen counter. 3 sentences, the address, the time, and bring nothing you aren't willing to lose, because she'd made him promise not to go without her, and he'd agreed, and he was keeping that agreement. He woke her at 5:40. She was already half awake. She read the note, looked at him, and went to wash her face without saying anything. Charlotte was still asleep. Elena, Margaret's sister, a compact 68-year-old woman who'd driven from Fairfield at 3 a.m. without a single complaint, was asleep in the armchair in the front room with her coat still on, one hand near her phone. They left at 6:15. The drive was 22 minutes in the pre-dawn dark. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the road and didn't speak for the first 15 minutes. Then she said, "What does he look like when he's cornered?" "I don't know," Vincent said. "I've never seen it." "You've known him 27 years. He's never been cornered in 27 years. He paused. "That's what made him good at what he does." She absorbed this. "And now? Now he's going to walk into an empty floor and find us there and understand that the architecture he built, the files, the structures, the 27 years of accumulated leverage has been removed from his reach." He kept his eyes on the road. "How he responds to that will tell us everything. And if he doesn't break, everyone breaks when the thing they've built their identity on is taken away." He said it without pleasure. "It's just a question of what they look like when they do." She looked out the window at the city going gray in the early morning. "I want to ask you something." "Ask." "The files he has, on your operation, the legitimate and the not." She chose the words carefully. "If he uses those, if this becomes a legal situation, what happens to you?" He was quiet for a moment. "It depends on how much he's kept and where. Gerald's smart enough to have distributed the sensitive material across multiple locations. It wouldn't be in his office, but I've had Strand working through the night on the digital side, and He paused. "We've recovered significant ground. The documents that would do the most damage are the ones he kept personally, outside firm systems, and those," another pause, "those require his active cooperation to deploy, which he's not going to have, because you're going to make sure of that." "Yes." She looked at him. "Legal or otherwise?" He glanced at her. "Legal. Evelyn, I'm not going to do anything tonight that puts me in a position where Charlotte grows up with a father in a federal case. I made a decision last night in that kitchen." He looked back at the road. "I'm done with the otherwise. As of last night, I'm done." She studied his profile. The jaw, the eyes on the road, the particular stillness of a man saying a hard thing and meaning it. "That's a large thing to decide in a kitchen at 2 a.m, she said. "Most large things get decided that way." He paused. "The quiet ones, anyway. The ones that stick." She turned back to the window. Neither of them said anything else until he parked. The Foss building was a 12-story glass and steel structure on Park Avenue that Gerald had moved into 14 years ago when the DeLuca account had grown substantial enough to justify the address. The lobby was marble and understated, and the security desk was currently unmanned. Conti's work, Vincent assumed, without inquiring into the method. The elevator bank was operational. They rode to the 6th floor in silence. The doors opened onto a hall that was completely, absolutely empty. Not cleaned out empty. Normally empty, the way offices are at 6:45 in the morning when the staff hasn't yet arrived. But the security camera at the end of the hall had a small piece of black tape across its lens, and the door to Gerald's private office at the far end of the hall was already unlocked. Strand was inside. He'd gotten there at 5 and he looked like it. His tie was off, his shirt had the texture of a man who'd been working through the night, and he had a laptop open on Gerald's desk and a stack of printed documents beside it. "How much?" Vincent said. "Enough." Strand didn't look up from the laptop. "He's been building a file on Charlotte for 3 weeks, since the day after you first went to the Grand." He turned the screen. On it was a document, clinical, organized, that contained Charlotte's school enrollment records, her pediatric medical history, her birth certificate, Evelyn's Vale alias documentation, and a legal analysis of paternity claim procedures under New York family law. Evelyn stood very still. Vincent watched her read it. 3 weeks, she said. The photograph at the Grand was the first day, Strand said. Someone on the restaurant staff. A busboy. Gerald had a relationship with him. The kid had a gambling debt. Gerald cleared it. He looked up. The kid's been feeding him since you started showing up, Vincent. Vincent looked at the busboy information, memorized the name, set it aside for later. Madison Brooks, he said. The woman they went to last night. She's stable. Mercy General confirmed at 4 a.m. concussion, 4 stitches. The 2 men who went to the apartment, I have their names and location. They're waiting on Gerald's instruction. Right now, they don't know what's happened here. Leave them where they are. Vincent looked at the room. Nothing moves until Gerald is in this chair. Strand nodded and moved to the window. Evelyn had put the document down. She walked to the far side of the office and stood looking at the framed photographs on Gerald's credenza, the kind of photographs that lawyers and executives keep, images of proximity to powerful people, the visual evidence of a life spent at significant tables. She looked at them without expression. He's in every one, she said. Every important moment in your family for 27 years, standing just behind. That's where he liked to be, Vincent said. No, she turned. That's where he needed to be. There's a difference. She looked at the photographs. Standing just behind someone else's power is only comfortable if you control the person in front. She paused. The moment you became someone he couldn't control, he had to eliminate the threat. She looked at Vincent. That's what Charlotte was to him. Not a child. A variable he couldn't control. The elevator at the end of the hall chimed. Everyone in the room went completely still. Footsteps in the hall. Steady, measured, the walk of a man arriving at a place he's arrived at thousands of times. A key in the outer office door. Then the realization, half a second of hesitation, that it was already unlocked. Then the inner door opening. Gerald Foss was 62 years old and looked, in the ordinary way of men who've spent their lives in offices, like a version of authority that has gone slightly soft around the edges but retained its essential confidence. Gray suit, silver hair, neatly maintained. A coffee cup from the lobby cart that he was still holding when he opened the door and saw Vincent sitting in his chair, Evelyn standing by the credenza, and Strand at the window. He stopped. He didn't drop the coffee cup. That, Vincent noted, said something. The 2 men looked at each other across 27 years and the width of a desk. Sit down, Gerald, Vincent said. Gerald looked at the chair across the desk, his own client chair, the one he'd put people in for 27 years, and then back at Vincent. His face was doing the work of a man who is running calculations and trying not to look like he's running them. Vincent. His voice was even, remarkably even. This is... Sit down. Gerald sat. He looked at Evelyn. Something moved through his expression. Not guilt, not precisely. More like the look of a man acknowledging a variable that has behaved unexpectedly. Mrs. DeLuca, he said. Don't, she said. Just the one word. The same way she'd used it with Vincent a week ago, but colder. Gerald looked back at Vincent. Whatever you think. I don't think anything, Vincent said. Strand. He nodded. Strand turned the laptop to face Gerald and walked him through it. The Charlotte file. The busboy. The 2 cars. The call to Evelyn at 6 a.m. The shell company registration linking the burner phone to Fordham Advisory Group. The Wi-Fi metadata from the photograph. He laid it out in the flat, sequential way of a man presenting evidence rather than making an argument. And Gerald sat across the desk and listened, and his face went through several things, none of which were surprise. When Strand finished, the office was quiet. Gerald looked at his coffee cup. He set it on the edge of the desk, precisely, with the exact care of a man doing something with his hands so he doesn't have to immediately speak. Then he looked up at Vincent. You built your empire on this office, Gerald said. His voice was still even, but something in it had shifted. The particular quality of a man who has been caught and has decided that dignity is the only remaining currency. On what this office managed and protected and kept alive for 3 decades. Without me, DeLuca Holdings doesn't exist in its current form. Without me, you go down with your father's debts at 24 and there is no empire. I know that, Vincent said. Then you know that what I've done, everything I've done, was to protect the structure that keeps everything running, an uncontrolled heir appearing without legal framework, without managed integration, with the potential to destabilize succession. A 6-year-old, Evelyn said. Her voice came from the side of the room like something thrown. You use the word heir. You use the word structure. She is a 6-year-old child, and you sent 2 men to an address where my friend lives alone, and they put her head into a kitchen counter. She didn't move. She didn't raise her voice past a certain controlled register that was, Vincent knew from experience, more frightening than shouting. I want you to say that without the legal language. I want you to say what you actually did. Gerald looked at her. For the first time, something in his face shifted that wasn't calculation. I didn't intend for anyone to be hurt, he said. That's not what I asked. A silence. I used a child's safety as leverage, Gerald said. Quiet. Stripped. I had her photographed, and I used it to create pressure. He paused. And 2 men I hired were rougher than instructed. Were they? Evelyn's voice had gone somewhere very cold. Or did you instruct them to send a message and then construct a story about rougher than instructed when it became inconvenient? Gerald looked at his hands. He didn't answer. Evelyn looked at Vincent. He read her face, not asking permission, taking stock. Then she walked to the window and stood with her back to the room and looked out at the city coming up in morning light. And he understood she was removing herself from the next part of this, not because she was done, but because she'd said her piece, and now it was Vincent's. Vincent leaned forward, both forearms on the desk, which put him closer to Gerald than Gerald would have preferred. Here's what happens, Vincent said. You're going to transfer the Fordham Advisory Group accounts to a holding entity that Strand has already prepared. You're going to countersign the restructured succession documents that reestablish Charlotte as a named beneficiary under her legal identity. You're going to provide Strand with the location of every physical file that pertains to the DeLuca operation, legitimate or otherwise, and you're going to do this today, before you leave this building. Gerald looked at him. And in exchange, you retire. Vincent said it simply. Full pension. The house in Greenwich stays yours. You keep the bar license. You don't practice law in any capacity for any DeLuca-connected entity again, and you don't contact Victoria Kensington or anyone else in my orbit. He paused. And the 2 men who went to Madison Brooks' apartment last night turned themselves into the NYPD this afternoon with a story about a residential break-in that went wrong. No mention of you, no mention of me. A story that closes clean. You're letting me walk, Gerald said. He didn't say it with gratitude. He said it like a man checking the arithmetic. I'm letting you walk, Vincent said. Because putting you in a legal process means putting the DeLuca name in a legal process, and I'm done burning things to the ground to make a point. He held Gerald's gaze. But hear me. If you deviate from any part of this, if you make one call, send one document, speak one word to anyone about Charlotte or Evelyn or this morning, I will use everything Strand recovered last night, and I will not be careful about what else burns. Do you understand me? Gerald understood him. That was clear. It took until 10:47 a.m. Strand sat across from Gerald for 4 hours while Gerald worked through the documents, made the transfers, signed what needed signing, and dictated the locations of 12 separate file caches distributed across 3 cities. Evelyn sat in the outer office for most of it, on the phone with Madison's doctor at Mercy General, and once with Elena, who reported that Charlotte had woken up at 7:30, eaten toast, and was now in the backyard examining the November garden with what Elena described as very serious attention. Vincent stood at the window of Gerald's office for most of those 4 hours and said almost nothing. When it was done, Gerald stood from his desk and picked up his coat and looked around his office once. The photographs, the framed documents, the shelves of case files and leather-bound precedents that represented the visible portion of a career, and then he looked at Vincent. For what it's worth, Gerald said. It isn't, Vincent said. Not today. Gerald nodded. He left. Strand closed the laptop. He looked at Vincent with the expression of a man who has done a complicated thing and is waiting to see how he feels about it. He'll keep to it, Strand said. He's not a man who fights wars he's already lost. I know. Vincent moved away from the window. The 2 men in Madison's apartment. I'll handle the handoff this afternoon. Strand. Vincent looked at him. Thank you. Strand nodded once. He didn't make more of it. That was, Vincent had always appreciated, one of the man's best qualities. Vincent found Evelyn in the lobby. She was sitting in one of the lobby chairs with her coat on and her phone in her lap and her eyes on the middle distance, and when she heard the elevator, she looked up. He crossed the marble floor and sat down in the chair beside her. "Done," he said. She exhaled. It was a long, slow exhale, the kind that takes something with it. "Madison," she said, "is going to be fine. She gets discharged tomorrow. I've arranged for the hospital bill and for a car to bring her home." He paused. "I'd like to speak to her personally when she's ready." Evelyn looked at him. "What would you say?" "I don't know." He was honest about it. "Something that isn't adequate, but I'd say it anyway." She looked at the lobby door at the November morning outside. "Victoria," she said. "I called her at 9. She knew about Gerald's plan to pressure you. She provided him with your real name, which she'd found through her own sources 2 years ago when she first became suspicious that I had a past I wasn't sharing." He paused. "She didn't know about the men. She didn't know it would go physical. When I told her about Madison, she went quiet for a long time, and then she said she was leaving the city for a while." He looked at his hands. "I think she meant it." "That's it? She leaves the city?" "She's not a criminal. She made a calculated, self-interested decision, and it led to something she didn't anticipate and doesn't want to own." He paused. "I know that's not justice, but prosecuting her means explaining everything that surrounds it. And I meant what I said in the car. I'm done burning things to make a point." Evelyn considered this. She didn't agree entirely, and he could see that, but she also, he could see, understood it. "What do you do now?" she said. "With the operation. I already have a meeting with my legitimate business director on Monday." He looked at the lobby door. "The criminal side doesn't end overnight. I know that. But it can be reduced, contracted, transferred, dissolved piece by piece over time in a way that doesn't create a vacuum that something worse fills." He paused. "It takes 2 years, maybe 3. But it's possible. I've known it was possible for a long time. I just didn't have a reason that was larger than the inertia of it." She was quiet for a moment. "And Charlotte," he turned to look at her. "That's what I most need to talk to you about." She met his eyes. "I'm not going to ask you for anything you're not ready to give," he said. "I'm not going to show up and install myself in her life and present myself as a father and expect her to. She doesn't know me. You barely know this version of me." He paused. "But I would like to try, slowly, on her terms and yours. I would like to be someone she can trust enough eventually to call by name." He stopped. "Whatever name she wants to call me." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. The lobby was quiet. Outside, the city moved past the glass in its ordinary morning way, indifferent and continuous and entirely unconcerned with the specific geography of this moment. "She asked about you this morning," Evelyn said. "Elena told me. She woke up and you weren't there, and she asked where the sad man went." She paused. "Elena told her you had something to take care of. She said okay, and went to look at the garden." Vincent looked at the floor. "She's easy to love," Evelyn said quietly. "She always has been. She came into the world like that, yes, just open. I don't know how." She paused. "I don't think I had much to do with it. I just tried not to damage it." "You didn't damage it," he said. "That was all you. 6 years of being exactly enough." He looked at her. "I know I can't give those years back. I'm not going to pretend otherwise or try to compensate for them in ways that aren't real, but I'm going to show up, consistently, as long as you'll let me." She looked at her phone in her lap. Then she looked back at him. "Don't make me promises you're making in a lobby at 11 in the morning after the worst night of the last 6 years," she said. "I'm not making them for this morning." He held her gaze. "I'm making them for the version of this that still exists in a year. When it's not dramatic. When it's just Tuesdays, parent-teacher nights. Someone has to pick her up because you're on a double and she needs to be somewhere." He paused. "That's what I'm asking for. The ordinary version. The one that isn't a crisis." She was quiet for a long time. "One thing at a time," she said finally. "Yes. We tell her together, when the time is right. Nothing before she's ready. Yes. And if she decides she doesn't want, then I step back," he said, without argument. "Her call." Evelyn looked at him. She looked at his face with the particular attention of a woman who has been lied to by this man before. Not deliberately, not cruelly, but through the particular arrogance of someone who believed his own version of the world. And she was checking now for the thing that was different, whether it was there, whether it was real. Whatever she saw, she looked at it for a long time. Then she stood up. She put her coat on properly. She picked up her phone. "Elena texted," she said. "Charlotte wants to show us something in the garden." He stood. "What is it?" Apparently she found a caterpillar and she's very concerned about its winter plans. Evelyn looked at him sideways, and something happened at the edge of her expression that wasn't quite a smile but lived in that direction. She asked Elena if caterpillars celebrate winter or just sleep through it. He thought about that. What did Elena say? She said she didn't know, and they should ask someone who might. She moved toward the door. So apparently that's us. He followed her out of the lobby into the November morning. The air was cold and flat, and smelled like the city does when it's been up longer than you have. They walked to the car without touching, without the particular false intimacy of people who've decided something in a moment of crisis, because that wasn't what this was. It was quieter than that, more uncertain and more real. Elena's house in Fairfield had a backyard that backed onto a tree line, and Charlotte was crouched at the far edge of the lawn when they arrived, her coat on properly for once, and her hands cupped around something in the roots of an old maple. She looked up when she heard the gate and saw them both, and her face did the uncomplicated calculation of a child determining that the correct people were present. "It's still here," she called out. "I put some leaves over it so it wouldn't be cold." They walked across the yard. Evelyn crouched beside her first. Vincent crouched on the other side. Charlotte opened her hand slightly. The caterpillar was there, dark and slow, making its deliberate way across her palm. "Will it be okay?" Charlotte said. She was looking at Vincent when she asked it, which he thought might be because he was the unknown quantity and unknown quantities required information. He looked at the caterpillar. "It's preparing," he said. "It knows what's coming. The cold doesn't stop it. It just changes what it's doing for a while." Charlotte considered this with great seriousness. "And then what?" "And then spring," he said, "and it's something completely different." She looked at the caterpillar, she looked at him, then she looked at her mother. A 6-year-old's triangulation, reading the room the way children read rooms with the unfiltered accuracy of someone who hasn't yet learned to discount their own perception. Then she looked back at the caterpillar and said, "I'm going to name it Gerald." Evelyn made a sound. She pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Her eyes were bright, and she was looking at the lawn. Vincent looked at the lawn too. He breathed in the cold air and felt something move through him that was not like anything he had a word for. Not happiness exactly, because happiness was too simple for it, and not relief, because relief implied that the hard part was over and he understood clearly that the hard part was most of what was ahead. It was something more like recognition, the sensation of arriving somewhere that had been there the whole time. "Gerald's a good name," he said. "I know," Charlotte said simply. She lowered her hands to the roots of the maple and let the caterpillar move back into the leaves she'd arranged there. She watched it for a moment. Then she stood up and looked at Vincent with the directness that was already her most characteristic feature. "Are you going to be around?" she asked. He held her gaze, the clearest eyes he'd ever looked into. "Yes," he said. She nodded, absorbing this, running it through whatever internal system she used to evaluate the world. Then she said, "Can you make pancakes?" "Charlotte?" Evelyn started. "I can learn," Vincent said. Charlotte appeared to find this acceptable. She picked up her backpack from the base of the tree, slung it over both shoulders the way she always did, and walked back toward the house with the complete forward momentum of a child who has asked the important questions and received adequate answers and now has priorities to attend to. Evelyn stood up from her crouch. She and Vincent both stood in the yard and watched her go. "She's going to be fine," Evelyn said. Not a reassurance, an observation. The flat, earned certainty of a woman who had built that fact from nothing. "I know," he said. They stood in the cold November yard at the edge of the tree line, the maple above them going bare, the sky the particular pale gray of late morning in a season that is finishing with something, and Margaret's sister's house was yellow-lit in the distance with Charlotte already at the door, and behind them the woods were quiet and bare and going into their long change. There were no promises made in the yard, no declarations, no claim that the road ahead would be simple or that the past had been absorbed without scar. Evelyn had loved this man once with the kind of love that leaves permanent architecture in a person, and that architecture had not gone anywhere, but it had been reshaped by 6 years of raising a child alone and running and building something from the materials available. And what it looked like now was different, and what it could become was not yet determined. He had been the kind of man who controlled things. He was trying, slowly, to become the kind of man who showed up instead. Those were not the same project. They required different muscles, and he'd only just begun to understand which ones. But Charlotte was at the door, holding it open, looking back at them with the impatience of someone who has been promised pancakes and is monitoring the timeline. And that was enough for now. That was exactly enough. They walked back across the yard, and the gate closed behind them, and the maple stood in the cold with its roots around a caterpillar named Gerald, and all that patient, coming change, and the yard was empty and still, and the morning held,